Welcome to Child's Play by Early Years Resources, the podcast dedicated to exploring innovative approaches in education.
Join us and our expert guests as they share ideas, strategies, and valuable insights to support the curriculum and help meet the needs of all EYFS and primary school children. On today's episode, we speak to Michael McAndrew, who is a primary school teacher in South Manchester passionate about supporting the well-being of children in classrooms.
Michael has just completed a Master's in Leadership in Learning at the University of Manchester, exploring primary school teachers' classroom role in promoting positive mental well-being. Welcome, Michael. Would you like to introduce yourself to our listeners?
Yeah, so my name's Michael and I am a teacher, a primary school teacher in Greater Manchester. I've been teaching for around 6 years now, I'm going to my 6th year, and I currently teach a year 3 and 4 class. I've actually just completed yesterday my Masters, and that's all to do with wellbeing and how we as teachers can promote positive wellbeing within our classroom.
Well, congratulations on completing your Masters. That's so exciting.
Thank you.
This week, a lot of children will be heading back to school. Do you have any advice on ways to help children settle in and get to know the new faces?
I think primarily just to take time in the first few weeks to get to know the children. I think we often forget that is the most important thing, in my opinion, is the relationships you build with the children. And even if you have 5 minutes with one child in the first few weeks, build that into your time just to have that one-to-one chat with the child. Obviously, I've got 31 children next year, but it's just having that moment with that child one-to-one so that they understand you and you understand them, and then you can start to build that relationship with them, really.
For teachers who are new to a school or who are moving classrooms, what tips would you give to create a positive environment for an unfamiliar space?
I think if I went back in time and reminded myself and asked myself this question, a few years ago, I would 100% tell myself just to give it time, because I think a lot of teachers in the past have gone into classrooms and thought, I need resources on the walls. I need all these beautiful displays. I need this information here. I need that information there. And I think at the moment, which is really good actually, there's a big kind of push on it not being a sensory overload in the classroom. And we've had a big push at our school in terms of our displays and the way we present work on the walls, not to overload the children. So I think if you're going into a new classroom in September, just have the first week just to acclimatise yourself anyway. Obviously have the basics up, but just give yourself time to understand what you need. And I think the main thing I would suggest is to get hold of the resources for the children that they will use. And I think everything else will come over time.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of classrooms where, obviously when I was a child many years ago, it was all very much like colours everywhere, and everything was like 3 primary colours. And I've seen like this big movement now to make it a bit less, like you say, like overwhelming. It's so interesting, the difference between 20 years ago, 25 years ago.
Yeah, it's taken a while, to be fair. Like our classrooms are only changing really this year. We've had a big push on like Hessian and Bax boards, because apparently that's kind of works well with children who struggle with sensory overload. And I think the colours we put on the walls really impact. I mean, we know as adults that when we walk into a white room, we know how it feels and the environment and the impacts that can have on you. So I think that it's only right that we've finally realised that it will have an impact on the children as well.
Yeah, you mentioned like sensory overload and kind of making sure that the displays are not too overwhelming. How else could teachers kind of tailor their classroom to support children with additional needs?
I think just using a lot of visual supports for children who have additional needs. I know that we have in our school, we have a visual timetable. So just making sure that that is up on display so that children can see it throughout the day. They know what's going to happen next. And I think that's one thing that the children really do struggle with at first, is just the unpredictability of the day. But once they know the structures, what's going to happen next, and that can be helped with a visual timetable, obviously. We use, for some of our EAL students, we use some widgets. It's like Widget Online. It's a tool that you can use where they obviously print kind of an image to support the word. So for instance, if it's like the registration at the start of the day, it'll have a picture just so they can understand as well. And even labeling resources, it depends on what year groups you're in, but labeling resources, so even something as simple as a chair, if it's got a label on it, that is a chair, and you can see the picture, you can see the word. And I think they really kind of help the children to settle in, especially if they've got additional needs.
Yeah, just going back to that point about the sensory overload, I just thought of it because I mean, so I am relatively new to Manchester and from like a small village in Yorkshire. And I find the city to be quite overwhelming sometimes. It's very noisy, it's very like city. Do you think maybe like having that kind of calmer space in like the classroom might help a lot with like children who learn in this a city environment, more of like an urban environment?
Absolutely. I think it's really difficult, I got to say, before I say this, because obviously I've got a class of 31 children, and fitting them in a classroom in itself is hard work, never mind having a space for children. But I think even just building it within the school somewhere is really important. And I think one of the things I would say to try and get children to come in and not have these anxieties is just to spend a bit of time in the outdoors in the first few weeks. We're very fortunate at our school to have a wonderful outdoor area where the children can go and explore and enjoy. But even if it's just as simple as a playground, just being in the outside and the outdoor space, it's a completely different environment, and the fresh air. You're not in an enclosed, four-wall classroom. It really does impact the children.
So the new school year can be obviously, as you're probably aware, a really busy time for teachers with like so much to absorb. There's probably so much going on for you. What advice would you give to a trainee teacher or maybe someone who's just beginning their first year on how to cope with the busyness of it all?
Yeah, I think there's probably a number of things I would suggest. I think primarily I found this out the hard way, but being organized and prepared is really crucial. As simple as it sounds, not to stress people out, but it is essential, because once you're in front of the children, that's you for the day. And so actually having everything prepared beforehand, it just makes life so much easier. But I would also say that on the contrary, being over prepared is no use whatsoever. So make sure you have a life outside of the classroom, because you can prepare. I could have worked the whole 6-week holidays completing work that I needed to do for the next year, but I didn't, because there's no point in doing that if you've not got a life outside of school. So just make sure that you remember that if you're stressed, you've not had enough sleep, then the kids are going to be stressed as well. They feed off your energy. So just make sure you're enthused at going back in on the first day in September. And I think just from my last year in teaching that I had just had last year, I would say just make sure you remind yourself that you're not on a one person like crusade. You can just enjoy the people that you work with as well. I think what last year was one of the most enjoyable years, just because I had some really strong friendships within my colleagues and fellow teachers. And that journey with them was so much more beneficial than being on your own and being stuck in the classroom on your own with 31 children.
Yeah, I think it's so important to remind yourself that you're not on your own. There's people in the same situation as you, and hopefully you have a good support group.
In terms of how schools themselves can help, do you have any advice for practitioners who might be hesitant to ask for support?
I mean, asking for support is the best thing that you can do, especially if you're a new teacher. I am I don't know what to say. I'm quite a competitive person. So when I went into teaching, I always wanted to be the best. I always wanted to know everything. I always wanted to be the first. I always wanted to be the most knowledgeable person. And I hated asking questions. And that really didn't help me. So I think just make sure you remind yourself that asking for support is the best thing that you can do. I mean, talking obviously like in terms of mental health, I had a point not last academic year, the year before, where I needed to ask for support. I was getting to the point where teaching wasn't my thing. I was about to leave education, etc. And actually asking for support is the best thing that you can do. Just remember that you're not on your own, as I said before. And also, I'm quite a competitive person, and I didn't want to ask for help initially when I started teaching, because I'm quite proud and I always thought I can do this myself. And that is the wrong choice to make, because there's so much experience and so many people in your school that will be able to support you in every single step along the way. And you might think it's a big thing to ask for help, but they'll just see it as a little question throughout the day. And I think in terms of myself, when I asked for support a couple of years ago, when I was struggling in the classroom, that changed my career path really, because I was ready to leave education, I was ready to leave teaching, and actually asking for support off somebody in my school, and showing myself honestly, rather than hiding things, that really helped me to kind of change my mind because I was ready to leave teaching. And you see it with a different perspective. When you actually speak to people, you realize that everyone is in the same situation. No matter what experience level they are, they've all been through what you're going through. And opening up and telling people about how I was feeling whilst I was teaching a couple of years ago, it opened conversations up with people at my school that I never thought that would have struggled, because they always look like they've got everything in hand, they've got everything in order. And I think just remind yourself that asking for support is absolutely okay, and it's probably the best thing you'll ever do.
No, that's a really valid point because I think for our listeners as well. So me and Tahira both work in social media, and a lot of the social media that we see is very like, what's the word? It's very like rainbows and kittens. Like it's the very surface of how people are feeling or what their day looks like. It's just like a second of photographs. And people often forget that it's just a small segment of their day. And that's probably not what that person's full day looks like. So it's really interesting.
And it sounds like you have a really good support system as well.
Yeah.
But I guess that isn't always the case, as there's a lot of pressures and not enough funding, training, or just general support. What advice would you have to practitioners in those situations?
First of all, I think that it's really unfortunate that we find ourselves that some schools aren't as supportive as they need to be, which is a real shame. And I think that's something as teachers maybe sometimes we've just got to accept that unfortunately that's the case. But I think even if they are deemed of no use at the time, still persist with asking for support, because at the end of the day, you're only one person, you can only do so much. And if you kind of have this attitude that maybe they're not going to help, which probably they might not do, then you're just on your own then. So, but also maybe speak to, if there's any friends that work in other schools, reach out to them. I know there's a big community online, teachers, Facebook groups, there's obviously Twitter, and there's people you can reach out to on there that'll be really helpful and really supportive. They might have some ideas that you can try. And I think just remind yourself that teaching is tough. Like it is going to be tough.
Just on a more positive note, though, what do you think has been the most memorable or standout highlight so far in your career?
That's a tricky question. I remember I was thinking about this the other day, and there's not one point that stands out to me. I think it's just a general kind of feeling that I appreciate my role really when children come back and visit my classroom. And so I've got children who are year 6 now. I taught a number of years ago, and they'll come back to the classroom and they'll come and say hello, and they'll be really happy to see you. And that moment in itself makes you think, well, I must have done a good job because they're happy to see me. They want to come and speak about their achievements. They're really proud of where they're up to. And I think what I found as well was you get all these presents at the end of the year, all these gifts, all these chocolates, all these, alcohol in some aspects. But one thing that really stood out to me, the best gift I ever had, so to speak, was the kindest of letters was written by one of the parents. When I first arrived at my current school around 3 years ago, it was just after the pandemic, so September 2020, and I'd been then at that school for a year. And one of the parents sent a letter in to the head teacher just to say how much that she appreciated my support over that whole year, not just for her child, but for her as well. And that stands out really as one moment where I thought, wow, like that is, I've really made an impact on not just the child's life, but the mum's life over that last year. And I think I've still got the letter somewhere. I don't know where it is, but I've still got it.
It's so funny about children coming back to the school to like just talk to you and tell you about their achievements. I've often thought, I don't know about you, I've often thought about going back to my high school just to see who's there, because I don't think my teachers would recognize me now. I used to be so shy. I was still shy in some aspects, but I used to be like literally hiding behind my hair. And now I'm hosting a podcast and I'm on camera all the time. So I think it would be really funny to go back and see some of my high school teachers.
I think definitely like I think once they get to a certain age, you kind of well, we know ourselves, don't we? You were too cool to go and approach teachers, but it's really nice that some children still come and see you and have a chat, and it's really nice to know that you're a big part of their life, or you have been a big part of their lives.
Yeah, maybe the epitome of cool.
So you mentioned earlier that you just finished your master's. What are some of the key insights and areas that you covered?
Yeah, so my master's was looking at essentially a primary school teacher's role in promoting positive wellbeing in their classroom. So I undertook kind of some interviews with teachers, some kind of focus group discussions with children. They both completed questionnaires, teachers and pupils. And essentially what we found was that wellbeing obviously plays such an important part for teachers and for pupils in the running of school. Actually, teachers found that wellbeing was the most important factor, never mind achievement, assessments, anything like that. They ranked well-being as the most important, which I thought was a really good thing because I didn't think that that was the case in practice. But we actually found that it's now starting to get more of a foothold in the curriculum. I know within the PSHE curriculum, lots of teachers are now educating the children on well-being and how important that is in their lives. But I think one of the main things I found out was that school culture was really important in promoting well-being. And I think that if school culture isn't to promote well-being, it gets quite difficult for an individual teacher because if they're not feeling looked after, we found that actually teacher well-being impacts people well-being quite a lot. Pupils commented that if their teacher was annoyed or if their teacher was angry, that really upsets them. So therefore, how you feel has a huge impact on the children. And I think going back to what we started with earlier on in the discussion, in the relationships you build with the children, they're really seen as crucial. That I found in my study that if the relationship between the teacher and the pupil is not strong, then well-being is hugely impacted for many reasons. For one example would be that the children are less likely to come to speak to you about something that's upset them. That could be something really small, but as a child, that could be something that's really huge to them. And the relationships you have between teacher and pupil are really important, but also pupils highlighted that the relationships they have with their friends often are the ones that cause upset or cause them to be happy as well. So happy and sad, we talked about the feelings. And pupils' relationships with their peers were hugely important to them in terms of their well-being. So I think for schools as a whole, my recommendation was that we need to make sure we spend more time on helping these children to socialize and to be with their friends because they've missed a year of their life at such a young age due to the pandemic. And school life is already limited in terms of the space that the children get to play at lunchtime and in the mornings. I remember when I was a kid at school, in primary school, I'm sure we had like an afternoon break. That is not the case anymore. And I think that it's really important. One of the key findings I found was that the relationships between both teachers and pupils with their peers were hugely important to well-being in general.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And to kind of touch on something you mentioned earlier, spending time outdoors is something children really benefit from. And it helps provide those opportunities to build bonds and relationships. In what ways do you like to bring learning outside?
Well, as I said earlier, we're quite fortunate at our school to have a great outdoor learning area. But even if you haven't, just be creative in what you do. Sometimes we find it quite frustrating that we're asked to have one lesson, maybe a half term in the outdoors, or one lesson within a unit of planning to be outdoors, and that's seen as quite annoying. But in actual aspect of it, it's actually really beneficial for the children because it just takes them out of that four walls environment and you can be creative. I know that I love teaching PE, so any kind of maths lesson using PE, it's amazing. We did statistics, we've done, adding, subtracting. You can do anything, you can be really creative outside. Even if it's a case of when you're practicing the times tables, anything that you can get in the outdoor environment is really beneficial. And I know that we're very fortunate to have a forest school area in our school or within our school grounds, and the engagement that the children have with certain things such as English topics. If we're reading a book, get them out into the forest, in the outdoors, and it really brings stories to life a lot of the time. So,
Yeah. Okay. Before we say goodbye, what final key takeaway, if any, would you like listeners to remember from our chat?
I guess just to enjoy the journey that you're on. I know it's very cliche, but teaching is a roller coaster. Like, it is ups and downs, and I've been at the down points not that long ago. But just enjoy the journey, because at the end of the day, I think my girlfriend's a teacher as well, and we find ourselves getting bogged down in our to-do lists. And getting through our to-do list, and you forget where you are in life, and you forget who you're with and the experiences you're having with the children, with the people at your school. So just being aware and being in the moment of where you are and who you're with and what you're doing, because you're doing a really important job, and you played a really important role in the young lives of people.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Congratulations again for completing your masters, and we hope
Thank
that
you.
Monday brings joy and not absolute chaos with 31 children.
Yeah,
Are you
it'll be
excited?
fine. It'll be fine.
Are you excited to be back in the classroom?
Yeah, yeah. Honestly, sometimes 6-week holidays feel really quick, but then other times I think back to the children, because I'm having children that I taught last year. I'm having them again this year, like half of them, and I think of some of the faces. I'm thinking I actually can't remember what they look like. It feels like such a long time since we've been in the classroom for 6 weeks. I'm actually really looking forward to seeing them again, and I won't be saying that after a week of being in there, but it is what it is.
Well, it's been really lovely talking to you. Thank you so much for coming on to our podcast.
No, you're welcome. Thank you for having us.
So what a lovely conversation we've had with Michael today. It's really interesting to hear from his perspective. Katie, what's been your key takeaway from today?
My key takeaway was that if you feel like you're not getting the support that you need in your school, and you've asked and asked and asked, then there is always someone out there who is willing to help you. There's lots of groups out there on social media. Michael mentioned a few, but there's always someone, a friend, family, or maybe someone in one of these groups, and there's always someone out there who will be willing to support you.
Yeah, it sounds like conversations are quite important, whether that's with your peers or with the children themselves.
Yeah.
So when he mentioned taking the time to speak to the children individually, you get to kind of help them get ready to learn and settle in. If they have any concerns or anything like that, they can bring that up in that time. I think that's a really positive way to start the school year, for sure.
Also, go back and see your teachers. Go back and see them. They'll love it. They'll love to see how you're getting on. I'm going to go see my teachers.
Once again, thank you to today's guest. And if you'd like support, you can find links to helplines below.
Let us know what you thought of this episode by following us on Instagram and Facebook at Early Years Resources.
Remember to follow, share, and review. Don't forget to catch us on our next episode.
Thanks for listening.
Goodbye.
Bye.